I present to you a world where, with power and money, you can do anything, but someone who has nothing appears and beats everyone, beats men, beats women, beats those who hit women too. Let's go! The Valhalla Academy is one of the top 3 hunter institutes in the world. Every year, many hunters try to enter this institute, but with a success rate of 1 in 500, few succeed, and even among those who do, only 150 students can graduate. You can see that the level of difficulty is just like real life, right? On the first day of class, there's already a bunch of people training, and anything goes. People with nothing in their hands against people with swords. Watching them is the senior combat instructor, Lee Sang-chil. After a while, someone named Yoo Min-jun arrives to see the candidate from his family who deserves all our attention. Yoo So-yeon, from the Yushin family, one of the 5 most prestigious families in Korea. Everyone who crosses her path is defeated due to her talent with mana and the sword. She is a promising talent, but she doesn't draw much attention from the instructor until it is mentioned that her family has communicated with a constellation guardian from the Yushin family. This grabs the instructor's attention. In this world, there are 5 chosen ones to be the constellation guardians, where it is normal for hunters to receive blessings and protection from the guardians or make a contract for it. Each of these 5 guardians has a different power. The Yushin family has the god of the sword, Jang San family, the god of spirits, Jin Choi family, the god of martial arts, Ocean family, the god of fists, John family, the god of the bow. Yu Yun, having communicated with a guardian, is a great genius with incredible potential. Passing the academy test will be easy, they say. This is so important that the whole world is watching through cameras. The fight of the 17-year-old super talent will be against Kim Ju-hyuk, also 17 years old. The instructors are even surprised at how calm the boy was knowing who he was facing. Confident in an easy victory, the fight begins. Our girl draws her sword, but there's no sign of the boy. She decides to attack. Her swordsmanship was incredible, as well as her control of mana, and the attack was precise. Guys, believe it or not, he just punched her in the chest and won the fight. Our protagonist was even disappointed with the fight. And now we see the real truth. 300 years in the past, in the Tower of Destruction, there was a fight between the owner of the Tower of Destruction, Brace the King of Destruction, and the martial king Kim Hyeon-oh. Even with equal footing, the fight ended with the victory of the martial king. Here, the foot was in the face, not equality. By defeating the King of Destruction, who was trying to destroy the world, he saved the earth, but his injuries were very severe. When the tower collapsed with the defeat of its owner, the brave martial king couldn't escape. He only had time to lament because he was always very poor and became a hunter to survive and wouldn't be able to enjoy the money, fame, and power he always dreamed of. Before entering the tower, he even prevented his disciples from entering because it was very dangerous. And in the end, it was indeed. But at least if it was only him being crushed by the debris, then he would be happy. Here you understand why he deserved to reincarnate. He deserved it. He reincarnated into the body of a boy 300 years after that day in the Tower of Destruction. His knowledge of his past life remained, so even with this new weak body, he is very strong. Currently, on Earth, times are peaceful, so he can finally have the peaceful life he always wanted. But nothing good lasts forever, and the curse system window appeared, informing him that in 5 years the Tower of Destruction would reappear in the world, and the great hero must prepare. In other words, the peace he dreamed of wouldn't last. The protagonist even thinks he should have burned Brace's body to ashes or something, but there's no use crying over the past. Anyway, in this era, the conditions of the tower should be easier, so he decides he will have his peaceful life and enjoy it even after this warning. The system also orders him to find his lost weapons and memories. For that, he must go to Valhalla, and the system gives him the exact address. Even without knowing what these weapons and memories were, or even what place this was, he went to the academy. On the first day, he defeated the most promising girl in a single punch. If he wanted to be discreet, it didn't work. On the last day, his opponent was a 17-year-old Hulk from the Ocean family, the Kings of the Fist. The instructor kept an eye on the protagonist. This time, his opponent knew what he did on the first day but remained confident. That's because the protagonist didn't look dangerous to him. He even said he would kill him in this fight. But the Hulk spoke in a way the protagonist didn't understand. using some slang. When the Hulk explained that he would send him to hell in this fight, the protagonist just told him to sit down and calm down. The opponent became furious. His talent that brought him here was his physique. His body was perfect. With little training, he achieved the results of geniuses. And there he was, another genius being humiliated by the finger of the poor and failed protagonist. Furious, he charged to attack the protagonist, full of exploding hatred. The protagonist knew his body wasn't as strong as his opponent's, and he recognized that. This punch might indeed send him to hell, so he dodged and then swept the muscular guy off his feet. Look at his style. The protagonist delivers the famous move everyone knows, the powerful chest slap, and once again, with just one strike, the opponent was defeated. He is experienced and counted on his opponent being stupid. There's already a lesson for you all. Take notes. The next lesson is how to hit on girls and make them fall in love with you. The Fist of Love. The protagonist wins again, confident that even though his body is weak, he will become even stronger than in the past. And this was seen by everyone and also broadcasted, with many scouts from the main teams watching the protagonist stand out among the elite families. One of them is the head of the Kings of the Fist family. He saw the fight and, as an excellent martial artist, noticed the protagonist's talent. One detail is that the Hulk is his eldest son. The father said the son was reckless as always and attacked with everything on the first blow. The most amazing thing is that the protagonist was faster and handled it like a master. Knowing everyone must have noticed this, the old man wants to try to bring the protagonist into his family at any cost. The protagonist's next fight has an audience of shady men, which irritates the protagonist because it's a bunch of adults drooling over a little girl. This being the last fight to determine the ranking of those approved for Valhalla, his opponent is now the second daughter of the Choijin family. Her name is Choi-rin, 17 years old. At least she's prettier than the first one. Let's see if she's more talented. Her first move is to analyze the opponent's reaction. She does this, and there's an awkward atmosphere with both standing still. The protagonist notices this. She's using her brain and let him make the first move, which already made her better than the others. So he calmly moves his heavy hand towards her, approaching her inside. She uses her lightning sword, impressing everyone with her talent for using an elemental skill at her age. And meanwhile, the protagonist calmly watches this. When she sees an opening, she goes for it with force and wham, a powerful slash, but it hits nothing but air. He dodged so fast that when he appeared beside her, even I got startled. Imagine how she felt. Then he delivered the famous chest slap. She was caught off guard but not unprepared, blocking the strike with her sword. The protagonist starts to see more value in the girl. RM felt her whole body vibrate from the impact and knew that if it had hit her body, she would have died. Then once again, the protagonist appears in front of her before she can even react, this time mocking her, telling her to dodge this next strike. A short, powerful punch lands on her stomach, her sword glued to her belly, and she collapses, unconscious. Another fight won without holding back just because she was a girl. Kazuma approves of this protagonist. With this result, the ranking of the students is Kim Juhyeok in first place, Choi RM in second, and some extra in third, along with other extras the manhwa didn't show. Being first in the best academy in the world, of course, a million reporters swarmed him after the event, asking him everything. The protagonist got so irritated that he flipped them off and cursed everyone out on national television. Here are the comments on his video on the internet.
NANI?
Later, in Valhalla, the approved students went to enlist. For the protagonist, being there was no big deal, unlike the others who were so nervous they couldn't sleep. He noticed that none of the approved kids even wanted to look him in the eye. Could it be they were afraid of getting beaten up too? He then wonders if he attracted too much attention yesterday. His plan was just to get into the most important academy in the world, go where the system ordered, and then leave. On the first day, the students were taken to a virtual fighting simulation room. The professor was freaked out. This year, his class had 3 geniuses from the 5 main families, 2 cute girls, and the hot-headed Hulk. Just this made him scared. Then he realizes the guy who defeated all 3 is also in his class. The professor felt sick and even had his blood pressure drop. When he finally calms down and starts the lesson, he introduces himself and immediately causes confusion by teleporting everyone to another place or something like that. Judging by the name of the lesson, it's a simulation of another place. He simulates a goblin attack while emitting an aura of bloodlust to show the real special world to the students. This scares even the geniuses from the main families. To them, it's hundreds of goblins wanting to devour everyone. Goblins in pairs, come here to show you something. Look at the size of this thing. The professor was satisfied with scaring the students, but there was one who felt nothing. So the professor calls the student and asks if he can defeat the monster outside alone. This made the protagonist think about it. The professor's intention was to lower the ego of the famous student by asking if he could do something impossible for him to deny, because no student could do it. He was just waiting for the protagonist to say he couldn't handle the goblins, to put the boy in his place. But to everyone's surprise, the protagonist gave a slight smile, which made the professor angry, as Kim Hyuk said he could do it. The professor, furious, shouted for him to go and try. The protagonist asked something before accepting, inquiring about the reward. Because this must be a test, he will only go if there's a reward. He will go if the professor makes a bet with him. The rage consumed the professor, and he replied that he would do anything the boy wanted. Imagine the possibilities for this statement. The professor began to explain how the monsters attack, but the protagonist said it didn't matter. He just needed a sword. He handed over the sword, and off the protagonist went, out of the protective barrier. Everyone was scared even within the barrier, the professor hoping the boy's arrogance would cause his defeat. Only violent cuts were seen by all, revealing micro-expressions of the protagonist's psychopathy. He thought it had been 300 years since he last held a sword to fight. When he was a child in his past life, he didn't have these skills. Now he returned to his childhood with the talent of a martial king. When a giant goblin tried to strike, the protagonist dodged effortlessly. Everyone inside the shield watched. The sword the professor gave him was trash, so it didn't make sense how he could cut everything with it. Naturally, the geniuses from the noble families were furious and envious, but one of them was moved, even blushing with emotion. The protagonist easily defeated all the goblins and told the professor he wanted to go to the Hall of Constellations as his reward for the bet, reminding him not to forget a promise. In the practical lesson, the protagonist was a god, but in the theoretical lesson, everyone was calm and confident. The protagonist was exhausted. This was the hardest battle he had in 300 years. The protagonist remembered he never went to school before. This thing called math was something scary. At the end of the day, everyone was heading to the dorms. The protagonist was thinking about the constellations since he knew nothing about them. 300 years ago, these things didn't exist. What he understood was that constellation is the term for those who achieve great fortune and power, treated like gods, usually hunters who reach the pinnacle of power. Valhalla is located in South Korea and is the third largest academy in the world, housing many constellation relics. He thought about many things about the current world, but what's interesting to us is that someone was following him. Shift the scene to the teacher's room, where the recently humiliated professor is recounting his class to the senior instructor, describing how a monster defeated 120 monsters in the simulation. We discover that the protagonist, or at least his body, is an orphan and not from an important family. If he was hiding his past, it wouldn't make sense for him to have attracted so much attention during the academy's admission test. The professor requests permission to take the protagonist to the place he asked for. He does this while feeling very sad about his problematic class. To console the professor, who is lamenting having 3 students from noble families in his class, the senior instructor says he is lucky not to have the exchange student from England, as foreign nobles are even worse. When he learns that his friend is in an even worse situation, the professor feels better about his own work. Nothing is better than knowing the neighbor's grass is worse than yours. Back to the protagonist, RM followed him. She went up to him and just stared for a while. What could she want? Want to get beaten up again? Yes. No. Just kidding. She went up to him to ask him to teach her fencing. The protagonist, being direct, says no without much thought. She persistently asks why not. Annoyed, he says he just doesn't want to. After this, the protagonist says he's leaving, but the crazy girl responds, "Teach me fencing." But I said no, damn it. He even questions if she's deaf, saying he said no, telling her to get out of his way, and leaves. And guess what? She stays behind thinking, "Teach me fencing." The next day, the protagonist Kim Hyuk was peacefully sitting in class, contemplating how weak his body was, with terrible mana control and 0 magical power. One way to improve this was to find that thing. Suddenly, someone approached him, the problematic exchange student from England, Rocco Ventrick from the Ventrick family, along with his assistant Uriah Felix. Since our protagonist knew nothing about the current world, he had no idea who the student was or the significance of his noble family. The arrogant student got angry, thinking the protagonist was ignorant, but still calmly explained about his family and asked if he wanted to become strong. The boy explained about the main families and their affiliated lineages, and how an affiliate could never reach the top. The Ventrick family was different from the others because they had a constellation guardian in the family, giving giving them immense influence in the world due to the Raven Mask. The arrogant boy talked too much, so the protagonist told him to shut up, saying he wasn't interested in hearing this crap. Then Trick even asked to make sure he heard correctly what the protagonist had said to him. The protagonist responded even more aggressively, calling him an idiot and saying he wasn't interested in him or in talking to opportunistic people. The guy was about to explode with rage, but someone ordered the students to sit down for class. The arrogant one turned angrily to see who dared to speak to him like that. It was the senior instructor. The instructor added that it didn't matter which family he came from. Here he obeyed the instructors or left. After being humiliated, he left the room, saying they would meet again. As the protagonist was leaving after class, thinking about what he learned, someone approached him from behind. "Teach me fencing!" She came to ask again, and he said no. Cut to the dormitory of the arrogant foreigner from England, who was breaking things in anger after being humiliated by the protagonist. To prove he's a scumbag, he ordered Yuria to do something she didn't want to do. He grabbed her by the hair, threatening to throw her out of the palace family, and other things until she agreed. His order was to call someone named Desera and give the order to eliminate Juhyeok. While some hated the protagonist, he was in his room training magic, but it wasn't yielding results with such a weak and impure body. In the middle of his training, he remembered the crazy stalker girl who followed him everywhere, always asking him to teach her fencing whenever he confronted her. He didn't know how to get rid of her, so he lied, saying he would give her a lesson for 10 million. He said this as he was turning to leave, but the girl asked for his phone. Confused, he handed it to her, and Aram added her number and returned the phone. I thought she was going to ask him out, but the crazy girl transferred 100 million to his account and said, "Teach me fencing for 10 lessons." The protagonist returned the money and said it was a joke, then left. Later, he thought maybe having money wouldn't be so bad, but quickly changed his mind, knowing money wouldn't be a problem once he got that thing. Dressed like an excavator, the protagonist went after that thing, searching for a hidden 300-year-old vault in the mountains of the academy. There should be at least 3 or 4 of them hidden. With the little magic he had, he emitted a mana wave to locate the vaults. Entering the area, he pulled out a shovel and began digging. His body was so weak that after less than a minute of digging, he was exhausted. Like me, he rested for a while, thinking he should have buried the vault shallower in the past, and then resumed digging. It took him all night, but he finally found it. After searching for the lock, he made a key that only someone who knew the shape could create with magic and opened the vault. Vault closed, vault open, we're inside. The place was full of gold, but what he really wanted were the mana storage stones, the true treasure here. They had been here for over 300 years and were still amazing. Now he would have enough mana to upgrade his weak body. Plus there was so much gold here that he couldn't carry it all. The next day at school, after spending all night digging, his muscles were on fire. Choi Erin was about to ask again. The protagonist felt sorry for her persistence. He researched her family and found out the Choi Jin family was the only one practicing fencing. So he asked why she didn't learn from her own family. She said it had to be him because she had never seen anyone in her family wield a sword better than him. The protagonist was as surprised as you are reading this. Her father, the leader of the fencing family, wasn't better than the protagonist? As she was about to say something, the teacher came to call Juhyeok politely. "Why now? It's about what you asked for before." "Goodbye, girl." Choi Erin was about to ask again but changed her mind. Then, miraculously, Juhyeok said, "Tomorrow at 6 in the morning in the training field." She couldn't believe she was actually going to get a free lesson. After that, he went to the teacher's room. The professor said they had to be quick because there was a class starting soon. The protagonist's request for access to the constellation building had been approved. He just needed to go to the school's basement, but he couldn't go beyond a certain floor. Juhyeok agreed, and that night after class he went. The professor was surprised the protagonist didn't mind only being able to go to the second floor of the building. So we skipped to the professor leading the protagonist to the underground building where Valhalla's treasures, the Constellation Hall, were kept. The place was heavily guarded, with more security here than at the academy's entrance, showing how important this place was. The protagonist observed that the tower walls above were covered with protective magic seals to the limit, as someone might hypothetically do to descend to the second floor unnoticed. Seeing his dangerous ideas, the professor warned that he would be arrested or expelled for trying, and it wouldn't work anyway, hypothetically. Not only that, the professor said that on the second floor, the power of the constellations flowed freely, and anyone entering would have their mind shattered by the power and go insane. The protagonist asked a few questions like this before entering, making the professor reconsider if he would get into trouble because of this kid. He was now in doubt, but after the protagonist entered, there was nothing he could do. Inside, the protagonist confirmed it. The system said that on the 5th underground floor were his memories and weapons, but he couldn't enter. But he came here for that, so he just descended anyway. As he went down the first stairs, he saw several vaults and nothing else. The system appeared to him, saying the requirements had been met, and he would be moved to the main hall. Everything went black until the protagonist saw the former king of destruction, who recognized him too. Barche said it had been 300 years since they last met. It was a grand reunion. The guy didn't even finish speaking before taking a punch to the mouth. The protagonist was furious. The guy asked him to calm down and took another punch on the other side. He asked for calm once more and took a third punch to the mouth. 40 punches later, the protagonist got tired, now allowing the guy to talk. The protagonist then started with kicks. After 32 kicks, Barche managed to speak, explaining that this was an imaginary world, a space within a relic, and this body wasn't real. The explanation was that the king of destruction had become a constellation, but the protagonist didn't care and punched him in the mouth again. After waiting outside for 30 minutes, the professor saw Juhyeok coming out without any problem. The relieved professor asked if he did anything wrong inside. The protagonist replied he did nothing. If he had gone down from the first floor, his mind would have broken, right? The professor agreed and left, thinking what a sly kid this protagonist was. On the way, he thought about the conversation he had. 99% of it was punches, and 1% was him asking if it was the king of destruction who made that system window, informing that in 5 years the tower of destruction would reappear. Barche said it wasn't him. Furthermore, Barche revealed he also received a message with the system window telling him to recover his memories by meeting the reincarnated Kim Juhyeok. He explained that in the past, a mysterious person made him the owner of the Tower of Destruction, but he didn't remember the rest of his past life. Unlike the protagonist, who remembered everything from the past, they shared what their system messages said. And finally, Barche revealed that the protagonist's weapon was one of the 4 sacred relics, and Barche himself became a constellation because he used the sword as a relic.
You bastard.
Now the protagonist didn't understand anything. His sword became a relic, and inside it was a constellation, his former enemy whom he killed. He left with his sword, the kid having stolen a relic from the country's most important academy. Okay, the maximum security here is a joke. Some second-year academy students, lazing around, saw the protagonist and decided to test if his first place ranking in the entrance exam was a big deal. The protagonist, calmly wanting to know if they really wanted to get beaten, heard them say yes. The first would be the bald one, and he immediately struck his throat and then his chest, sending the guy flying like a bird. The extra averted his gaze for 1 second, and when he looked back, the protagonist had his sword out and told everyone to come at him together. I would have left, but extras are always idiots. 3 hours earlier, the blonde was in the room of the English exchange student, and it was he who hired him to teach Juhyeok a lesson. As a reward, he would help his family. The kid from the Sunrise family accepted dealing with this because, as a second-year student, it was impossible to lose to a first year. Everyone who moved to the second year in Valhalla only passed when they went to the 4th floor and made a contract with one of the constellations. Someone like him, a contractor, was sure he could easily defeat him. That's what he thought until now, as watching the student defeat everyone like they were ants made him change his mind. It didn't even seem like he was fighting. Those who took too long to attack got beaten even harder than the others, leaving the guys wondering if they should flee or get beaten too. Everyone was crushed like ants, not one left conscious. Then the protagonist woke the leader with a slap and asked who he was and who sent him to attack. He gave his name but refused to reveal who ordered it. The protagonist wasn't irritated by this. Loyalty was good even from people who tried to harm him. The extra had the courage to threaten that the protagonist would be expelled when they found out he fought at the academy. Boys, the protagonist says it's fine. Spread the word that a first-year student defeated 10 second-year students. If they believe it, all 10 will be expelled too, ending their chances of joining a guild in the future. The protagonist won the fight and the argument. Later, the trash from England was waiting for a call confirming that the protagonist was crushed. When the phone rang, he heard only one phrase: "I'm dropping this job. You better not get in that guy's way. Goodbye." Ventric asked if they would at least report the protagonist to the academy, saying that if they did, the Ventric family would support them if they were expelled. Still, The kid refused and said goodbye. The power of fear won over money. After that, Ventric ordered a renegade member of his family currently in Mexico to deal with the protagonist definitively. The next day, in the morning, the protagonist was ready for training. He had arranged to meet the fencing girl, and as he was stretching, she appeared for the private lesson. She arrived saying, "Teach me fencing to keep the habit." But the protagonist's answer was, no. Before learning fencing, they needed to improve their physical conditioning. The girl, with her mind wandering, understood nothing except, "Teach me fencing." The protagonist had her stretched because the training would be intense. He noticed that nowadays people only train mana and forget about physical conditioning, which is a mistake. Even Aram, who has a lot of mana, would faint after running 20 meters, just like him. They started with 200,000 push-ups, 1, 2, 3 squats to strengthen the glutes, and a series of physical exercises from the gym. After almost an hour, the protagonist said that was just the beginning. When he mentioned they were going to run 20 miles, the girl was shocked. Later, in the classroom, the protagonist felt that good post-workout ache, while Aram was almost comatose from pain, her arm trembling non-stop. On this painful day, the teacher announced she would administer a written test on dimensional monsters and asked everyone to be silent. The test would assess their knowledge of dealing with monsters. The girl with Mikima's eyes finished the test easily. The big blonde guy seemed clueless, and Aram answered all the questions with, "Teach me fencing." The protagonist had already finished the test and was waiting for the teacher to collect the exams. When the time was up, she announced that the time was over and asked them to hand in their tests. Aram couldn't even turn her neck, she was so exhausted. The teacher left the room, and the king of destruction, now living inside the protagonist's sword, managed to talk to him, asking if he was sure about his answers. Soon after, we saw the teacher in the staff room, clearly displeased with something. She was furious with the protagonist's answers. While grading the normal students' tests, another teacher passed by, wanting to know how his students did. She said they all did well, as expected from the cream of society. He was leaving calmly, but when he heard the protagonist's name, he choked on his coffee. The teacher was furious with the protagonist's answers and said she would confront him in the next class. A week later, in the next class, with everyone standing, she called Juhyeok to step forward, and he did so calmly. Her goal was to confront his answers in front of the class. According to her, there was no place in the world where his answers made sense, and she asked if he had taken the test seriously. He said yes, so she began. How to deal with a goblin? His answer was, punch in the stomach. Second question, when 8 goblins run towards you, what do you do? His answer, send them all to hell. The teacher was irritated with these answers. Another question was, what to do against a monster with very high defense? For him, it was just to break the defense the same way. A punch to the chest would solve everything. The teacher almost went crazy, but he confirmed all the absurd answers on the test. Then, she activated the simulation room for him to prove his answers and practice. A goblin with very high defense appeared, and she told him to do as he said in the test. The protagonist never got nervous. He politely left his test, grabbed a sword, and went towards the goblin. The teacher knew he had defeated 120 goblins in another teacher's class, but facing a stone goblin with super defense was different. When they attacked, she was confident. He simply threw the sword into the stone goblin's stomach, which shattered completely. He even said, as I said, just one in the stomach and it's done. Everyone was shocked again, except Aram, who already knew his secrets. Now, the teacher also wanted to know how he did that. He said it was just about hitting the stomach. No secrets. The teacher was going crazy but still asked about the second question. And the 8 angry goblins coming at you? Is this what was supposed to be difficult? In the cave, 3 goblins saw him. The test was to use strategy to prevent these 3 from calling the others. Before she could even finish thinking, the protagonist knocked one down, knocked another, and stabbed the last one in the mouth. He didn't give the goblins a chance to call the rest. That's how the teacher learned that all his answers were correct. In the following days, more physical training sessions took place, with Aaron by his side, trying to survive. In the end, the poor girl could barely stand. The protagonist also got tired, but it seemed Aram had never trained in her life. When he asked how she would face the monsters from class, her answer was simple. She would borrow the power of the constellations. As the protagonist thought, they ignored training and depended on these constellations. It's not that the protagonist is against doing this, but what if they enter a dungeon with magic restriction or, in a very long fight, run out of mana from fighting for so long? He knew the risks of depending on that. So, The protagonist asked if she thought this exercise to improve stamina was a waste of time. Aram said no, but only because he had said that only after this would he teach her fencing. He asked if it was just because he said so, and she confirmed that yes. He said her training was over for the day, but his would continue. Actually, he asked if she wanted to continue, but Aram couldn't take it anymore, so she left. For the protagonist, the foundation of everything is having a powerful physique and then focusing on mana control, which is why he gave so much importance to it first. Next to him, the big guy was training, and he hadn't even noticed. The big guy had lost to him, but he wasn't lazy. He said he trained there every morning. When the big guy left, the protagonist acknowledged that physically, he was a monster. As for Aram, she had great observational skills, according to the protagonist. After much training, the protagonist looked at the mission given in the system. He went to the basement, took his weapon, and left a replica in its place. Now, the next step was to go to a house in the Valhalla forest. The truth is, if it weren't for the system, he wouldn't be in school but enjoying other things, like punching Brace more. Additionally, he wanted to discover more about reincarnation. Meanwhile, in England, at the Ventrick mansion, the family that adored Mass from the Plague era, the vice housekeeper, Adelia Ventrick, who was very beautiful, was receiving reports from the butler about missions and about Ventrick in Korea, and she called for Desira. Desira was the black sheep of the Ventrick clan because he had committed various crimes using the family name, including attacking 5 students at the school. He was expelled from the clan at the age of 20 and now wandered the world. Adelia, knowing about Ventrick's contact with this scum, ordered them to keep an eye on him and warned Ventrick that if he did anything wrong again, he would be expelled like Desira. Adelia was beautiful and honest, against those who used the family's power for their own benefit, as the power of the family's constellation was all hers. To give an example, the story cuts to a class where the theme was to show that those who use the powers of the constellations for evil are wrongdoers. When they operate in evil organizations, they are criminals. While the class continued, the protagonist was just thinking. The protagonist comments that his first body, in the past, was worse than the current one at the same age. Even though it is strange to have a weaker body compared to what he had at the end of his life, this body evolves very quickly. He doesn't understand why he was so sedentary and with such poor mana circulation at that age. Basically, the original owner of this body wasn't supposed to be weak, and he still doesn't know what happened to the boy who owned this body before. During the class, Makima calls the protagonist and passes him a note with just, "Hey" written on it. He didn't understand anything. Later, in the last class of the day, the responsible teacher announced that this weekend they would be allowed to leave the academy, but they must inform the campus. The protagonist goes to inform, and as always, his answers are simple. Suddenly, someone calls him with a "Hey." He looks and sees the fake Makima. The protagonist immediately asks if she also finds it fun to follow others. The earlier note, "Hey," he responded with, "What?" But she didn't say anything. The protagonist then insists she say what she wants, but she gets embarrassed and freezes. He gets irritated and tells her to hurry up, calling her crazy. She's surprised, asks why he called her that. She wanted to ask the protagonist how he managed to destroy a goblin with a weak sword without magic. That shouldn't be possible, but her pride didn't let her speak. When it seemed like she was finally going to ask, the teacher appears and asks what Makima was going to say. The protagonist, not understanding why everyone is on him, asks if the teacher doesn't hate him now, due to the class where she was embarrassed. The teacher says she doesn't care about that. She believed there was only one way to deal with those situations, and he opened her eyes. She is grateful, actually. The teacher drags the protagonist out, asking him to be her assistant. He refuses, and the fake Makima is left out, unable to ask her question. Another one who, apparently, will soon blush for the protagonist. Returning to his room at night, the protagonist has a computer, but it's on his cell phone that he searches for a place to sell the treasures he took from the vault. The place for that is called the market, a space where people from anywhere in the world can trade. It's known as the black market due to the wrongdoers who use it. The protagonist's deduction is that the market is illegal, but still, the government doesn't interfere because it was created by a constellation guardian. When he searches for how to go to the market, he receives a message from Aram. He immediately asks what it is. She responds that she can't go to training because she is going to travel. She happily sends a bye, but it seems the protagonist doesn't like small talk. He prefers to get straight to the point. He hangs up the phone, and the next day, he goes looking for this market. In an abandoned cafe, he enters and the next step is to turn right. Through a door, he exits into another place, where it is already night, a famous portal. This place feels familiar to the protagonist from his past life. But before he can think more about it, someone calls out to him. A man in a leather jacket collects the fee of 2 million to gain access to the market. The protagonist pulls out the brick of money he won for coming in first place in Valhalla. Today's goal is to sell some jewels. The man in the leather jacket explains how the market works and recommends Morris's shop at the end of the street for jewelry. Before going, the man gives the protagonist an amber mask, as everyone in the place wears masks to remain anonymous. In the market, everyone walks around wearing masks. At Morris's shop, the protagonist arrives saying he has some items for evaluation. He pulls out a small pouch from his backpack and places it on the table. When Morris picks up one of the rings to examine through a monocle, he almost has a heart attack. It was an artifact from the era of destruction. Morris checks each item in the pouch and sees they are all relics from an ancient era. He asks the protagonist how much the rings cost, but the young man insists such questions are not asked here. Morris apologizes. The rings are so expensive that Morris doesn't have enough money to buy them all. He suggests auctioning the rings at the market auction, but that would take weeks. The protagonist insists on knowing how much they would be worth there, and the value surprises him. The protagonist knows they were rare items in his past life, but they weren't worth that much back then. Morris says he only has a fifth of their value, which is 5 times less. Even so, the protagonist agrees. Morris almost freezes hearing this. Artifacts from the era of destruction are valuable due to their age, but mainly because, after that era, the constellations emerged, and those who possess these relics are highly regarded by the higher-ranked constellations. Morris is certain they are genuine, as the energy of destruction is still strong in them. He buys them all. Sometime later, someone visits Morris, leaving a lingering doubt in the air. The protagonist returns home. He sold for a value 5 times lower because he wanted the money immediately. Looking at his phone, he sees he has 2 million won. He paid 2 million to enter the market and sold the jewels for 2,500 million won. Now he's rich. When he was about to head home calmly, the phone rings. The nosy teacher got his number from the school and practically forced him to have lunch with her now. She said she would pay for lunch, so he goes. You must also be curious about Morris. The person who showed up there is called Black Cat and is the owner of the market. This explains why Morris was chilled by his presence. They had never spoken in years of the market. The reason for the contact is that Morris requested to participate in the auction for the first time in years, so Black Cat wanted to know what he had. Black Cat actually works for the constellation that owns the market, and he examines the items before they go to auction because the constellation might be interested in them. As soon as he saw the rings, the constellation was both scared and interested. The constellation on the other side really wanted Morris's rings, and that's how Morris lost his rings. The teacher who called the student over the weekend paid for a pizza and a generous portion of shrimp pasta to try and convince him once again to be her assistant. The protagonist refused without a second thought. Anyone would want this opportunity, but he couldn't care less. She argued that she could get him a scholarship and that they could write an article together. She almost offered everything, but the protagonist still didn't care. All he wants is to reach the center of the great forest because of the system, and these distractions will only get in the way. As a last attempt, she offered information in exchange for him being her assistant. Even so, the protagonist didn't want to, but the teacher insisted and started talking about Choi Arim and how she is about to be disinherited from the family. The teacher tried everything to convince the protagonist to be her assistant but failed. He was curious about why she is so strict in class but so childish outside of it. For her, dealing with monsters is so serious that it can't be treated any other way in class. If the students don't have fear, they might underestimate the monsters and end up dying. The protagonist, satisfied with the answer, said, "Is that all? Bye." Guys, the protagonist is literally the freest person in the world. If he doesn't want something, he has no fear of refusing, and if he doesn't want to talk, he just leaves. Now that the teacher mentioned Arim, let's go to her family, the Choi-jin. The leader of the True Story Guild and head of the Choi-jin family, Jeon-seok, the eldest son Jin-yeon, and the second daughter, Choi Arim. Today, Jeon-seok announces that soon they will have the chance to inherit a contract with the family relic. If they fail the test, they will be expelled from the family. That's right, folks. The leader draws the sword and asks if they will take the test to decide the next family leader. Both say yes, so in 3 weeks, the test will be held. As they leave, the eldest brother asks if Arim didn't read between the lines. She can't even speak, didn't read anything. The brother says their father didn't want her to take the test and drops the bomb. An illegitimate daughter has no right to be the family leader. Everything is fine only because they know she has no chance of winning. For the first time, we see an expression of sadness from her. This brother is no saint. He rubs in her face that he has a contract with a constellation, and she can't even touch him. He leaves, threatening to beat her for sucking the family's money for so many years. Aram's determination, remembering her sick mother in the past, shows that she needs to win. Her mother asked her to become the family leader to have the right to be free. The next day, in the classroom, the teacher explains that every 2 months, exams are held, and the last placed are expelled from the academy. It's a filter to select the best and force everyone to strive all the time. They are practical and theoretical tests. The protagonist knows that, in practice, there's no risk, but in theory, it could go badly for him. The protagonist's idea about this is as follows. He has had these classes in the past, and knows all about it. He literally says he's going to cheat. His pet constellation is against this because it's wrong. The protagonist responds that what's wrong is that he isn't beating the constellation up every second of the day. As the class ended, Aram spoke up for the first time, saying something other than, "Teach me fencing." She asked if they would be training today as well. The protagonist replied that now it was indeed time for her to learn fencing. The girl practically glowed with happiness. In the training room, the first thing he wanted to see was her sword. She drew a large sword, and he started with the basics, how to hold the sword correctly. With a simple instruction on how to grip the sword, mana began to flow naturally through the blade, something she didn't even know how to do. The next step was for her to attack with everything she had. Aram began to emanate lightning, and her body's agility surprised even herself. Even though the protagonist easily defended, she was much faster, and he confirmed this. Another lesson was how to concentrate magic in parts of the body for more speed. Her strikes were good, but she also needed to learn how to defend. The protagonist also moved a lot, and the exchange of blows between them lasted an hour, with Aram giving her all while he taught. When the lesson ended, she couldn't even stand up, as always. She acknowledged that she was much stronger since the opening ceremony day, but she still couldn't reach the protagonist, who was on another level. Before ending the lesson, she wanted a serious duel with him. For the protagonist, this could be interesting since she was raw talent and fun to train. He thought that 300 years ago, she would have had the potential to be his disciple. She asked again about the duel, and he, to provoke her, said he didn't want to. But this time, she accepted it calmly, which was surprising because she was extremely stubborn. She even said that if he didn't want to, it must not be the right thing to do. Basically, she accepted that if she followed his words, she would definitely become stronger. 2 weeks later, the students, including Aram and others, were gathered. The senior instructor explained the bi-monthly test. This time, it would be a dungeon raid.
Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on upcoming videos. Leave a like if you enjoyed it and share with your friends. See you in the next video. Bye for now.